Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Dennis Levin, and I'm retired pastor here at Queen Street United Methodist Church in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Wesley Bible class. And today we're going to be going over chapters 29 and 30 in the book of 1 Samuel. And these are interesting chapters. Chapter 29 picks up at the end of chapter 27. There's an intermediate chapter that has to do with Saul going to a medium for advice. Now we're getting back into the events of the day and the pending battle between the Philistines and the Israelites. Okay, so in chapter 29, now the Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek while the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. Achish is the king of the Philistines, who's putting this whole coalition of Philistine lords together for the battle. The commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" Now understand that the word that they're using for Hebrews is something like the word that Hebrews came out of from the Egyptians. It's a derogatory term. It's like, who are these low-caste foreigners coming along as part of our army, okay? Evidently, David is not, the lords of the Philistines are not enamored by David, and they don't trust him worth a flip. Good for them. All right. Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of King Saul, who has been with me now for days and years? Since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day." Well, because he wasn't looking very hard. Okay, David totally had this guy snookered. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back so that they may return to the place that you have assigned to him. He shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become an adversary to us in the battle. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is this not David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. All right, so what are they worried about? Well, it's something like when Longshanks, Edward I of England, tried to get the Irish to fight the Scots. And the Irish and the Scots were cousins. And so he lined them up on the front line, put the Irish on the front line, and when they came up to the Scottish line, they ran to each other and embraced each other and turned on the English. Okay, so the Philistines think something like this is going to happen again.
Well, what? I don't get David in this. I mean, he is a Jew.
Yes.
He's already had two chances to kill Saul and didn't
Yes.
do it.
Right.
So why is he willing to go into battle with the Philistines against the Jews?
Maybe he's Irish and the Israelites are Scots.
That just doesn't make sense.
Okay.
To me.
You'll find out a little bit in the conversation that transpires, but David is in a dilemma. This is a fish or cut bait kind of thing, where he has really he can't cheat King Achish anymore by attacking his allies, which he's been doing, and then come back and report that he's been attacking Israelite towns and villages. Okay, so this is all going to be out in the open. Who are you actually for? David, I think, is contemplating a situation. He's in the rear. The king wants him to be his armor bearer. A very high exalted position. So he's in a position where he's going to be next to the Philistine king in the middle of a battle. And I think he's anticipating that if he's positioned there in the battle, that he can take out Achish and totally demoralize the Philistine army in front of the Israelites. That I think is David's plan, although it's not articulated. Okay. Then Achish called David and said to him, "As the Lord lives, you have been honest and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in this campaign. Okay? Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you, so go back now and go peaceably. Do nothing to displease the lords of the Philistines. So he's saying, just lay low. David said to Achish, but what have I found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I should go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king? He does not name which king. See? He's always, there's just that hint of ambiguity in what he might do. Okay? He's not going to fight against Saul. He's going to be loyal to the king. Okay? The king is Saul. And he's been loyal to Saul, actually, the whole time that he's been in the Philistine camp. All right. Achish replied to David, I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. I wonder who commissioned this writing. Okay. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to the battle. Now then, rise early in the morning, you and your servants, and the servants of your Lord who came with you, and go to the place that I appointed for you. As for the evil report, do not take it to heart, for you have done well before me. Start early in the morning and leave as soon as you have light. So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went to Jezreel. What is this Jezreel thing? Well, anybody know how Jezreel fits into the New Testament? Jezreel is up north. And what is the terrain of Jezreel? Anybody know? Check out your book of Revelation. Okay.
It was a major agricultural center.
Right. Which means it's not mountainous.
Right.
Okay.
It's an inland valley,
That's-
fertile plain, inland valley.
Right. It is the place where most major battles in that area were fought. The Valley of Jezreel. The final cataclysmic battle that was going to take place that portends the returning of the Lord and the end of the world as we know it. Okay. When I was going into Desert Storm, some of the young men asked me, because they knew of my background, if I thought that this battle with the Iraqis was the Battle of Jezreel. And I said, no, this is just one of those Middle Eastern battles, because that's what they do for sport. Okay, so chapter 30. Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid on the Negev and on Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag, burned it down. These are the Amalekites now. These are the people that Saul was supposed to utterly destroy. Okay? They burned it down, and taking captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great, they killed none of them, but carried them off and went their way. Okay. It seems like really the only culture that we have a record of from that period that had a tendency to annihilate everybody that they went against were the Israelites. Nobody else is doing that. They consider the population that they capture to be part of the spoil, that they can sell as slaves or whatever. And so they don't kill them. They consider them spoil. So the Amalekites, even though David has been going into Amalekite encampments and cities, and the allies of the Amalekites, and annihilating everybody who lives there, the Amalekites are not doing the same thing. The Amalekites are taking captives. Okay? When David and his men came to the city, they found it burned down and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also were taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was in great danger, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in spirit for their sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. All right. David did not have a choice except to take all of his military people to fight with the Philistines. Okay? But they were still mad at him for doing it. Okay? Understand that the vast majority of the people that David has with him are not people of good character. Okay? The people that he's got following him are riffraff. And he's got 600 riffraff with him. And it's not hard for somebody who's riffraff to, they're basically like mercenaries. And when things turn against mercenaries, mercenaries aren't especially loyal.
Especially if somebody blind.
Yeah. Yeah. So this was, what they're saying to David is, this wasn't cost effective, maybe we need another leader. They're like pirates who elect their leader, you know? Okay. David said to the priest Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue this band? Now there's some ambiguity there, and I'm not sure how it works out. Okay? The ephod is the sacred object that they refer to in order to find out what is the will of God. Okay? So instead of going to a medium or something like that, which Saul tried to talk to the priest, tried to talk to, you know, the religious leaders, tried to get some feedback. God wouldn't talk to Saul. Okay? David does the same thing. He doesn't have to go to a medium because he gets an answer. Okay? But he says, bring me the ephod. So I don't know, he said, bring me the ephod, and he inquired of the Lord, which kind of puts Abiathar a little bit out of the picture in the writing. So is David using the sacred object himself to find out what the Lord has for him? Or is he consulting a priest? There's some ambiguity here. But I wouldn't put past David to say, okay, Abiathar, thanks for bringing me the ephod. Okay. Shall I pursue this band? Shall I overtake them? He answered him, God answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and surely rescue. So David set out, he and the 600 men who were with him. They came to the Wadi Besor, where those who stayed with, who were left behind. But David went on with the pursuit. He and 400 men, 200 stayed behind, too exhausted to cross the Wadi Besor. Okay, what's going on here is that he's got 600 men. They're pursuing the Amalekites, but they have their baggage. Okay, anybody who goes out into a military operation and doesn't consider logistics is not a good commander. David considers his logistics. Okay, so he's got a baggage train. They're getting close, but there comes a point where you drop your packs and charge. Okay? He's got 200 guys that just can't keep up. So he says, okay, you guys guard the baggage train. I'm taking my men lightly encumbered to catch up with the Amalekites. Okay, it's a good strategy, and he's left really enough people to secure that baggage train against some kind of a raid. One of the problems that we had in the Civil War, especially in the Western theater, that the Union Army had, was the Confederates had some very, very effective raiders. You know, and what they would do is they wouldn't come up against the Union Army. They'd go after the baggage train, and they'd loot whatever they could, and they burned the rest. And you had guys like Mosley and the guy who started the Klan. But those guys were very, very effective raiders, and drove Grant nuts. So Grant had to take a lot of his people off the line to guard the baggage train against these raiders. Okay. In the open country, they found an Egyptian and brought him to David. They gave him bread and he ate. They gave him water to drink. They also gave him a piece of fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins. Wow, they even gave him dessert. When he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David said to him, "To whom do you belong? Where are you from?" He said, "I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite. My master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We made a raid on the Negeb of the Cherethites, and on that which belonged to Judah, and on the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag down." David said to him, "Will you take me to this raiding party?" He said, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I will take you down to them." He doesn't mind turning on him. Okay? And this is something I was talking about in the last class. If you want to spy, don't find somebody that you compromise. Find somebody who hates the system that they're in because they've been wronged or they've got a score to settle. And if you have a system that's a dictatorship, it's not hard to find people like that. It just isn't, okay? So they're not going to have that great loyalty. One of the things that we found useful, some of the greatest spies that we recruited from the KGB were people who had been sent to Western countries to act as KGB agents, as spies. And they saw the contrast between the country they were in and the country they came from, and they realized that their system was not worth preserving. And they realized that they needed to help the West to succeed. So our best agents from the KGB were people who were disaffected with Soviet communism. All right. Okay, 16. When he had taken him down, they were spread out all over the ground, eating and drinking and dancing because of the great amount of spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines. Okay, so some of that spoil was Philistine, and from the land of Judah. Some of it was Judean. David attacked them from twilight until the evening of the next day. Not one of them escaped except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. David brought back everything. David also captured all the flocks and herds which were driven ahead of the other cattle. People said, "This is David's spoil." All right, so he has the opportunity to divide the spoil. As far as they're concerned, they figure David is going to be equitable about it. Well, he was more equitable than they expected. And David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David and who had been at the Wadi Besor. They went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. When David drew near to the people, he saluted them. And all the corrupt and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David, which was most of them, said, "Because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may take his wife and children and leave." So they figured these guys were worthless. Okay? But David said, "You shall not do so, my brothers. With what the Lord has given us, he has preserved us and handed us over to the raiding party, handed over to us the raiding party that attacks. Who would listen to you in this matter? For the share of the one who goes down into the battle shall be the same as the share of the one who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike." From that day forward, he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel. It continues to the present day. All right. David knows something as a commander that it's taken, a lot of commanders don't get this, okay? But David recognizes the value of the support system for the military, for the army. So the guy, in our military system, for every guy who's on the front line, there are 10 people supporting that person, at least. Might be more now. But logistics, If you don't have logistics, then you don't have victories. You just don't. And David knows that it's as important to take care of the people in the rear as it is to take care of the people in front. So when the American army goes someplace to do something, everybody who is in the combat zone gets combat pay. Okay? And everybody who's in the combat zone also gets tax breaks. Doesn't matter if you're a frontline troop or your logistics. You know, I've got a good friend who, for a long time, wouldn't have anything to do with the VA because he was Navy in Vietnam. And he didn't feel like he had been in combat. Well, he was in the combat zone. And if you're in a combat zone, believe me, you're in combat. And these days especially, where there aren't any front lines, okay? So David recognized that, and as a matter of principle, he supports his whole army, not just a part of it. When David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord." So he must be talking about, he can either be talking about the Amalekites themselves in general from this campaign, or he could be talking about the spoils that came from the Philistine encampments that the Amalekites despoiled. Don't know which one. But if it was the spoil in general from the Amalekites that they had taken from wherever, okay, then the Israelites who had been despoiled, I don't know if they got their stuff back or if David kept some of their stuff to spread out to the elders of Judah. Here's a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. It was for those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negeb, in Jatir, in Aurora, in Sipmoth, in Eshtemoa, in Rachal, in the towns of the Jerahmeelites, in the towns of the Kenites, who were not Israel, but they were allies. They were the ones around Jerusalem, in Hormah, in Boshan, in Atach, in Hebron, all the places where David and his men had roamed. So these are the places where David had been moving around while he was escaping Saul. These are the communities that David had depended upon for the support of himself and his military while he was being chased. Okay? So he is paying them back. Now, I don't know, they don't have the time frame, but I don't know if this is before the battle with the Philistines or after the battle of the Philistines. I suspect, however, that it's after the battle with the Philistines. Okay? The time after Saul has been killed. I really think David spread the joy in order to gain support for him as a new monarch. All right. I've got some time. I can do 31. Maybe we'll finish up 1 Samuel. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell on Mount Gilboa. That's a mount overlooking Jezreel. The Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua, the sons of Saul. He has one more son, by the way, which we'll find in 2 Samuel. And there's good reason why he was not in the battle. The battle pressed hard on Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by them. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, so that these uncircumcised may not come and thrust me through and make sport of me." Because humiliating Saul was humiliating Israel. So Saul is saying, of course he doesn't want to be tortured to death, which they would probably do. Okay, but he really did not want his people to be further humiliated by having the Philistines make sport of their king. But his armor-bearer was unwilling, for he was terrified. Okay, why was he terrified? He's terrified, and this is David writing. Now, understand this. He's terrified of killing Saul as ordered Because Saul is the Lord's anointed, and you can't raise a hand against the Lord's anointed. David makes that point over and over and over again. Okay? So the armor bearer does not want to be guilty of raising a sword against the Lord's anointed, even though that's the expeditious thing to do. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer, all his men, died together on the same day. When the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. So the Philistines expanded their territory deep into Israel. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, as David had done to Goliath, okay, stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the houses of their idols and to their people. They put his armor in the temple of Astarte, this female goddess, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan, again, up north. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men sent out traveled all night long and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the walls of Bashan. They came to Jabath and burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. All right, why did these guys do that? Because when Saul first took the crown, he was called upon to rescue the people of Jabesh-Gilead who had been besieged by the Philistines. And remember, Saul went all the way up from Gilboa and went up to Jabesh-Gilead and attacked the Philistines, rescued the town, and they hadn't forgotten that. So they went up and tried to restore the armor, the honor of Israel by retrieving the bodies of Saul and his sons, and brought them back to their territory, and they burned them there and buried the bones. So he was buried with honors. Okay.
It's interesting that Jonathan was killed, and as Jonathan seemed to have a relationship with God, he had led him on several raids.
Yes.
And then to have him, I just thought it was interesting that he was just killed with the rest of them.
It was, but then that was prophesied also by Samuel, or Samuel's ghost. Okay? And the idea was that there could be no succession from Saul. So Jonathan had to go. Sounds like God's plan to clear the thing. Saul did have one other son. We'll get into that in 2 Samuel.
And so why didn't that son have the same rights as Jonathan is?
He did have the same rights, but he was disabled. He could not go into battle. And because of his disability, he was in his legs, but because of his disability, he would have made a flawed king. Okay, but David still had to recognize that he was a threat to the throne. So we're going to see what transpires between David and the son of Saul. Remember, David also made a vow that he would not kill Saul's offspring. Okay? Can you imagine the dilemma if David had gone with the Philistines into battle and they said, the only way you're going to prove your loyalty to Achish is to kill Saul and all of his kids. So God spared him that choice. At least that's what David
I
said.
was thinking that they with them, though he didn't put the sword in him and killed him. I thought that he was with them, so.
Oh, I want to say something about Saul too, because the commentaries are all he was a bad guy and God abandoned him and all that. This guy heard from Samuel's ghost that if he went into battle, he was going to be killed and his sons were going to be killed. And guess what Saul did? He went into battle. You know, every once in a while, you're called on to do a mission where you really don't expect to come back. The term that was used for this is forlorn hope. You were going to be the rear guard. You were going to be the person sacrificed. So that happened a lot, like in the Battle of Chosin, where some of the Marines had to hold a piece of ground so that the army could escape. And it was miraculous that any of those guys got off that hill. But you know, you're given a mission where you really don't expect to come back, and you go anyway. I got to give it to Saul. You know, he was the king of Israel to the very end. You know, and his loyalty to his people. He got into trouble because he was loyal to his people. That's why Saul got into trouble. And Samuel said, you can't be loyal to your people and loyal to God. I don't know that that dichotomy is necessarily valid. But anyway, henceforth, we will be in the book of 2 Samuel, where Samuel's name is never mentioned. All right. Okay. God bless you. See you next week, and we'll start 2 Samuel.